Envision New York, January 1966. A different America. Lyndon B. Johnson occupied the White House, and Simon and Garfunkel's The Sound of Silence topped music charts, a title that would soon become chillingly literal. Back then, weather maps weren't in every pocket. Instead, people relied on morning newspapers, kitchen counter transistor radios, and the sight of a gray sky. It was a Saturday evening, and residents across the Northeast were settling in for late-night TV. As they prepared for bed, the snow seemed insignificant, a light dusting easily dismissed. Yet, while the region slept, the world outside was gradually being obliterated. By Sunday morning, the familiar sounds of city streets and rural routes were gone. By Monday, entire neighborhoods appeared erased, roads vanished, and landmarks disappeared. In some areas, it was impossible to discern where streets once lay, buried under a profound stillness. This was the blizzard of 1966, the storm that abruptly froze the Northeast. It wasn't a singular event, but myriad experiences, unfolding differently block by block, town by town. What seemed manageable in one area turned catastrophic just a few miles away. The blizzard's indiscriminate nature made it profoundly bewildering. Saturday, January 29th, 1966. The evening began like any other winter weekend across New York State and its environs. Families gathered for dinner, teenagers chatted on landline phones, and fathers engrossed themselves in newspapers while mothers tidied up after meals. Radiators clanked rhythmically, combating the January chill. Outside, the temperature hovered around 12 degrees Fahrenheit, cold, but expected for a northeastern winter. The forecast mentioned snow, as it often did in late January, predictable as morning traffic. The weatherman on the evening news spoke of accumulation, a few inches, perhaps more by morning, nothing to disrupt daily life. People heard the forecast and gave it no further thought. They had seen snow before, plenty of it. So what were a few more inches? They went to bed, tucked themselves in, and made plans for Sunday. Church, brunch, perhaps a walk if the weather improved. They were oblivious to what was already brewing in the darkness above. Most people failed to realize that in 1966, weather forecasting lacked satellite technology. Over the Atlantic, a colossal nor'easter was rapidly intensifying with unforeseen speed. Frigid air streaming from Canada was poised to collide with moisture-laden air ascending from the coast. In the subsequent days, areas near Lake Ontario would endure repeated onslaughts as lake-effect snowbands compounded the existing accumulation. Around midnight, the snowfall intensified. Most were asleep and unaware. The flakes were thick and heavy, clinging to everything they touched, accumulating on windowsills and blanketing parked cars, blurring the familiar contours of the world outside. By 2 a.m., visibility plummeted across much of the region. The few vehicles still on the roads found their headlights ineffective against the impenetrable white curtain. Drivers pulled over, some choosing to wait it out, others abandoning their cars. By 4 a.m., the wind arrived. This was no gentle breeze or typical winter gust. It was different. The wind shrieked across open farmland, transforming the snow into a horizontal barrage. In exposed areas, gusts fierce enough to unbalance people drove the snow sideways, making it feel less like weather and more like an attack. The snow was no longer merely falling, it was assailing. January 30th, 1966. Arthur, a 52-year-old transit worker, resided in a third-floor walk-up in Manhattan's Upper West Side. For 23 years he had commuted via subway, knowing the system more intimately than most knew their own homes. When his alarm sounded at 6 a.m., he followed his routine. He swung his legs out of bed, shuffled to the window to check the weather, and then froze. The window was a solid white. He saw nothing. Not the street, not the buildings opposite, not even the fire escape 3 feet away. Believing his eyes were malfunctioning, he rubbed them and looked again. Still white. Then he realized the white was moving, swirling. The window wasn't blocked. The external world simply ceased to exist. There was only snow, wind, and an emptiness where his familiar street had been. Arthur would later recount to his grandchildren that, in that moment, standing at his window in his undershirt and pajama pants, he felt genuine fear for the first time since the war. Across the region, similar scenarios unfolded in countless variations. A mother in Brooklyn attempted to open her front door, only to find it unmoving, blocked by a solid mass of snow. She pushed harder to no avail. Calling her husband, they both exerted their weight against it. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but white through the gap. They would remain confined to their home for 2 days. In Queens, a doctor awoke to his telephone ringing. The hospital needed him for an emergency. He promised to arrive swiftly, then hung up. Approaching his front window, he found his car gone. Not stolen, but buried. A white mound marked where his Buick had been, only the radio antenna protruding like a desperate plea. He began digging, but 2 hours later he had barely reached the door handle. The hospital would have to wait. Everyone would have to wait. In the Bronx, an 11-year-old girl awoke to silence. Decades later, she remembered not the snow, but the quiet. The city that never slept was utterly still. She thought she had gone deaf until she heard the wind, a low moan emanating from everywhere at once. However, the storm's true ferocity was felt upstate. Syracuse recorded staggering numbers, over 40 inches of snow in just a few days. Yet this figure scarcely conveyed the reality. The wind sculpted the snow into unbelievable drifts, reaching 15 feet high in some places, 20 feet in others, surpassing the height of houses and even first-floor windows. People peered from their second-story bedrooms to see nothing but white walls pressed against the glass. In Oswego, a city on Lake Ontario's shore, the totals were almost incomprehensible. The official measurement approached 100 inches, over 8 feet of snow, but drifts rendered measurements almost meaningless. What do you call it when snow is taller than buildings? A man from Oswego, interviewed years later, described stepping out of his bedroom window onto the snow, not sinking into it, but walking on it. The drifts were so densely packed, so solidified by the wind, that he could stand on them without sinking. He traversed his neighborhood on a white highway that undulated over buried cars, fences, and everything else. The town completely shut down. Nothing moved except for snowmobiles, which also struggled. Some bars miraculously opened, and for a few days the community gathered in search of warmth and companionship. It was like a party, one survivor recalled. But beneath the laughter, everyone knew how serious it was. It's crucial to understand that snow was only one component of this storm. The wind made it deadly. Sustained winds roared relentlessly for days, transforming the snow into a horizontal assault, sandblasting exposed skin and rendering sight impossible. One could not walk or even stand against such wind. It would knock people down. It hurled snow through the tiniest cracks in doors and windows. People awoke to snow inside their homes, piled in hallways, blown in through previously unnoticed gaps. And then there was the cold. Temperatures plunged into the single digits. With the wind chill, the effective temperature was brutal, causing exposed flesh to freeze in minutes. This was a lethal storm, and it claimed lives. Across the region, the death toll mounted. Heart attacks from shoveling, car accidents on invisible roads, and individuals lost in the whiteout, freezing within sight of their own homes. Most survived by doing the only thing possible. They stayed indoors. They waited. They prayed for it to end. By Sunday noon, The magnitude of the catastrophe became evident across the entire Northeast. Major airports closed, not just delayed. Runways vanished beneath drifts that reached the windows of parked aircraft. Thousands of travelers found themselves marooned in terminals ill-equipped to serve as hotels. Trains ceased operations. The Long Island Railroad, the New Haven Line, and routes across upstate New York all ground to a halt. Switches froze solid. Tracks disappeared. And engineers could not see signals through the whiteout. Buses stopped. In many communities, transit systems, proud of their unwavering service, conceded defeat. It was simply impossible to navigate a bus through streets that no longer existed. In New York City, subways largely continued operating, as underground lines were shielded from the storm's fury. However, above ground, where elevated trains were exposed, service became impossible, and reaching a subway station meant somehow traversing streets transformed into impassable white canyons. Across the region, the economic fallout was immense. Businesses could not open, workers could not reach their jobs, factories stood idle, and ports, usually bustling with activity, fell silent. The financial toll was approximated to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. However, this figure fails to encompass the human cost. The lost wages, the unpaid bills, and the small businesses that never fully recovered. When Monday arrived, many believed the worst had passed. They were mistaken. While snowfall had ceased in most areas, the wind persisted in exposed locales, and the region was so profoundly buried that excavation would require not merely hours or days, but weeks. The equipment that had successfully navigated every storm the region had encountered for decades proved insufficient. Plows would clear a road only for the wind to refill it before they reached the next block. They would push snow to the sides, creating walls so immense that subsequent passes became impossible. They often became trapped in drifts that completely engulfed them. In Syracuse, Salina Street, a major thoroughfare, featured drifts exceeding 20 feet in height. The only method for clearance involved physically transporting the snow away in dump trucks. There was no space to merely push it aside. It had to be removed. Helicopters delivered provisions to isolated communities. Bulldozers, not merely snowplows, but actual bulldozers, were deployed to create pathways for emergency personnel. The scene resembled a war zone. Schools remained closed for a week in numerous areas, with some extending closures even longer. It took 4 or 5 days for most principal streets to become passable in the most severely affected communities. Yet here is what transpired. When official systems faltered, communities appealed for assistance and help arrived, not from the government, but from each other. Throughout neighborhoods in the region, fathers and sons armed themselves with shovels and ventured outside, not to clear their own driveways, but those of their neighbors, to check on the elderly couple down the street, to ensure the widow with a hip ailment had sustenance and warmth. They organized themselves without prompting, without centralized coordination, without social media or group texts, or any of the modern tools we now take for granted. They simply recognized what needed to be done and proceeded to do it. In one Brooklyn neighborhood, a group of adolescent boys spent 2 days excavating their entire block. They sought no payment, nor did they anticipate accolades. They simply appeared with shovels and commenced their labor. A baker in Queens somehow managed to open his establishment. How he reached there, how he ignited his ovens, how he acquired flour, yeast, and all other necessary provisions remains an enigma to this day. Nevertheless, he baked bread and distributed it freely to anyone in need. For 3 days, his bakery transformed into the heart of his neighborhood, a warm haven, a source of food, a place that affirmed the community's enduring spirit. Children observed their fathers become explorers, watching them depart into a white wilderness with empty sleds and return hours later, fatigued and chilled, with bags of groceries secured by rope. These children never forgot that image. For children, the blizzard was an entirely different phenomenon. School was canceled, not merely for a day, but for a full week in many locations. Could you imagine? A week without school. A week of liberation. A week with snow so deep you could construct anything. The snowdrifts were not hindrances to children. They were playgrounds. Kids tunneled into snowbanks and fashioned intricate cave systems. They excavated rooms, added windows, and built entire subterranean realms beneath the snow-covered surface. The snow, compacted by the wind, retained its structure, allowing it to be sculpted like clay. They sledded off rooftops, literally off rooftops, because in many areas, the snow had drifted so high against houses that the roof merely provided a gentle incline leading to a white expanse where the front yard once lay. A girl from the Syracuse area, who was 7 years old during the blizzard, recounted decades later that she simply exited her second-story window and slid down the drift to reach her waiting friends. They spent the entire day constructing snowmen so towering that ladders were needed to complete their heads. A boy from Rochester primarily recalled the silence. He had grown up accustomed to the ceaseless sounds of traffic, buses, and the hum of a bustling community. Then, suddenly, nothing. Only the muffled quiet of a world enshrouded in white. He could discern his own heartbeat. He could hear his mother calling from 3 houses away. Sound propagated differently when an omnipresent stillness prevailed. The blizzard bestowed upon children a precious gift, an adventure, a narrative they would recount for the remainder of their lives. A week when customary rules were suspended, and they were free to explore a transformed world. For adults, however, the experience was distinct. The blizzard starkly revealed the fragility of everything, how swiftly the systems they relied upon could disintegrate, how tenuous the boundary between ordinary existence and mere survival. Parents observed their children engaged in play, yet harbored a quiet dread beneath their joy. They meticulously counted the cans in the pantry. They rationed milk. They pondered what they would do if the plows failed to arrive the following day, or the day after that, or ever. Many of them, for the first time, felt genuinely trapped. And then came the arduous cleanup. What does one do with such an immense volume of snow? It couldn't simply be pushed aside. There was no available space. The streets were too narrow. Vacant lots were already overflowing. So, they picked it up, literally picked it up. Work crews manually loaded snow into dump trucks, shovel by shovel, truck by truck. They transported it to empty lots, to parking areas, to any location where space could be found to deposit it. The cleanup extended for weeks, and in some areas, months. The final remnants of snow from the 1966 blizzard did not melt until May in shaded corners and deep valleys. By then, it had transformed into something else, a monument, a testament, a stark reminder of what had transpired during those impossible days in late January. Many who endured both storms were later asked which was worse, the blizzard of 1966 or the blizzard of 1993. The response was almost invariably the same. Once you've experienced 66, everything else is just weather. The storm instigated changes, not merely to the streets and infrastructure, but also to people's perceptions of winter, of preparedness, and of what communities required for survival. After 1966, cities across the region invested in snow removal equipment, more plows, more salt, more sand, and enhanced interagency coordination. The communities that had been caught unprepared vowed never to be caught again. Weather forecasting also improved, though not as a direct consequence of the blizzard. Satellites were beginning to provide images of storms from space. Radar technology was advancing. The tools that might have predicted the blizzard's intensity were under development even as people excavated their front steps. By the time the next generation confronted their own storms, they would have warnings, hours of advance notice, time to prepare, time to stock up, time to remain indoors. The populace of 1966 had none of these advantages. They faced the blizzard armed only with their inherent resilience and the mutual aid of their neighbors. And they persevered. However, the true legacy of the blizzard resided not in policy alterations or equipment acquisitions. It lay in the memories. Everyone who lived through it remembered. They recalled the silence. They recalled the cold. They recalled gazing out their windows at a world composed entirely of white. They remembered the neighbor who appeared with a shovel without being asked, the baker who distributed bread, the adolescent boys who cleared an entire block without compensation, the fathers who pulled sleds through waist-deep snow to transport food home to their families. They remembered the sensation of being utterly stranded, and they remembered the profound feeling of being truly helped. Ask anyone who was there. They will tell you it was the most severe storm they ever witnessed. And in the same breath, they will recount tales of the kindness of strangers, of the community that coalesced when everything else disintegrated, of the way people cared for one another. Because that is what disasters accomplish. They strip away superficialities. They reveal what lies beneath. And in January 1966, what lay beneath the Northeast's rugged exterior was something beautiful. Neighbors who were previously unacquainted learned each other's names during the blizzard. Strangers became friends. Communities that prided themselves on self-reliance discovered they were stronger when they collaborated. That memory has now faded. Most of those who experienced the blizzard are in their 70s and 80s. Some are gone. Their children recall the stories. Their grandchildren have heard them secondhand. Yet the narrative holds significance. It matters because it reminds us of our capabilities, our capacity for endurance, and our potential for generosity. It matters because someday another storm will arrive. Perhaps not snow, perhaps something entirely different, but something that will test us, something that will strip away the ordinary and compel us to discover our true selves. When that day comes, we will need to remember the blizzard of 1966. Not for the snow totals, or the wind speeds, or the damage estimates, but for the fathers with sleds, the bakers with bread, the neighbors with shovels. We will need to remember that when all else failed, humanity did not. Somewhere in upstate New York, in a neighborhood transformed beyond recognition since 1966, an old man still contemplates that storm. He was 11 years old then, merely a child. But he remembers his father awakening him before dawn on Monday morning. His father handed him a shovel. Not a child's toy shovel, but a genuine one, heavy and with a wooden handle. They ventured outside together into a world that had been utterly transformed overnight. The boy could barely comprehend what he was seeing. His street had vanished. The cars were gone. Everything familiar had disappeared beneath a white blanket that seemed to extend endlessly. His father began digging, so he too began digging. They toiled for hours. They cleared their own walkway. Then they cleared the elderly woman's walkway next door. They pressed on, joined by other neighbors, men and boys he barely recognized. Collaborating, they collectively tackled the seemingly insurmountable snowdrift, one shovel at a time. By day's end, his arms throbbed, his back screamed in protest, and despite his mittens, his fingers were numb. Yet, he had never felt more vibrant, more linked to his father, his community, his fellow residents. Now an old man, he has navigated numerous winters since. Nevertheless, when snow begins to fall, the wind intensifies, and forecasts predict heavy accumulation. His thoughts still drift to that Monday morning, his father handing him a shovel, discovering at age 11 what it meant to be part of something grander than himself. This is the true narrative of the 1966 blizzard. It encompassed more than just the snow or the cold. It was about the silence that enveloped the world and the people. Those who appeared, those who offered help, those who refused to let the storm have the final say. They are the reason New York endured, the reason Syracuse persevered, the reason Oswego and Rochester and every buried town and frozen neighborhood made it through. Because when the world turns white, roads vanish, and ordinary rules dissolve, we still have each other. The blizzard of 1966 receded into history. The snow melted, streets re-emerged, and life resumed its typical rhythms. People returned to work, to school, to the daily routines that had been interrupted for those impossible days. However, something lingered. For years thereafter, whenever snow was forecast, people across the Northeast viewed the sky differently. They remembered. They prepared a little sooner. They checked on their neighbors a little quicker. They no longer took the ordinary for granted quite as much. And when they gathered for family meals or holiday events, when conversations turned to weather and winter, someone would invariably bring it up. But they all shared the same fundamental truth. They had persevered together. That is the indelible legacy of the 1966 blizzard. Not merely a record snowfall, not just a historical weather event, but a story, a shared memory, a testament to what ordinary individuals can accomplish in extraordinary circumstances. The snow of 1966 disappeared long ago. Those who experienced it are aging, some have passed on. Yet the story endures, and as long as we continue to tell it, it always will. If you recall the blizzard of 1966, please like the video and share your experience in the comments. If you wish to support this channel and help us continue sharing these stories from the finest periods in American history, consider becoming a member or leaving a super thanks. Every like and comment genuinely means a great deal. I appreciate your collaboration on this project. Now, let's explore some fascinating insights into the early days of personal computing and how a pioneering company reshaped the landscape of technology. In the nascent stages of personal computing, the market was dominated by a handful of established players. These companies, with their proprietary systems and closed architectures, offered limited choices to consumers. Innovation was slow, and affordability remained a significant barrier to widespread adoption. This environment, while seemingly stable, was ripe for disruption. Then came a newcomer with a radical vision: to democratize computing by making it accessible and affordable for everyone. This bold ambition led to the creation of a groundbreaking personal computer that not only challenged the status quo, but also redefined what was possible for the average user. It was designed from the ground up to be user-friendly, offering an intuitive interface and a versatile platform for both work and play. The impact of this revolution was profound. The introduction of this innovative machine sparked a wave of creativity and entrepreneurship. Developers, no longer constrained by expensive development kits or rigid platforms, began crafting a myriad of software applications, from productivity tools to educational programs and engaging games. This burgeoning ecosystem fostered rapid advancements, quickly expanding the utility and appeal of personal computers. The ripple effect extended far beyond the technology sector. The ability for individuals and small businesses to access powerful computing resources transformed industries, ignited new forms of communication, and paved the way for the digital age we inhabit today. This era underscores the power of innovation to dismantle barriers and unlock unprecedented potential, demonstrating that a commitment to user-centric design and accessibility can profoundly alter the course of technological development and societal progress.